Our first person to share this morning is going to be Janice Rhodes. Janice is a longtime member of the UUG, having spent most of her adult life having negative feelings about Christianity and always feeling judged. She found herself looking for a community that she could be herself with what she found was a forever family. Come on up, Janice.
Hello, I'm Janice Rhodes. Can you hear me okay? Good morning. I think I've been a member here for about 8 years. I've lost count. It seems like it's just flown by. And I grew up in the Baltimore area near BWI. And my cousin was a Catholic, lived next door, and my parents were Lutherans, and we would go to one or the other church every week. And it just never clicked for me. I never quite got what everybody else got and never felt like I belonged there. So moved forward some years. I moved up here to Gettysburg, and I started working with the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment area at the time, and we were trying to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. And I met Susan Swope and Shirley and a bunch of other amazing women. And Susan was the first person who ever suggested that I come to UU. I'd never heard of it. And I was dubious because I'd felt so ostracized by religion in general. And years later, Ron and Ann Gilbert were friends of ours, and they invited me. I went like, oh, you guys don't want me. I don't even know what I am. Maybe I'm agnostic. Maybe I'm an atheist. He was like, we do want you. And I thought, yeah, really? So I didn't go. I kept putting it off. And I was wishing Jamie Thomas was here because Jamie was the one. Had a food truck with my son-in-law, which I don't have anymore, and that's a different story I'll go into a different time. But Jamie's got the gift of gab, as we all know, and she talks so glowingly about this church that I thought, I should come. So I came a couple of times. I saw Susan here. I felt great, and I knew Eleanor was here, and back then we used to introduce ourselves when we were new. Well, I just wouldn't do it. So Eleanor said, I'm going to introduce you. So she did. And after a while, it was like, I just really like these people. They're like-minded. They really, it's not fake. It's real. And I found a community that I felt really like I had friends and family here, people that I could really count on and that I really cared about. And my mother and my husband, my mother was living with us then, and my husband, they would just laugh because I was so anti-organized religion. And I said, well, you guys are going to kick the bucket, and I better have some people. I need people. So for me, it was like, 3 strikes and you're out. But for this place, it was like 3 strikes and I'm in. And I did a lot of work. I did the auction. Eleanor and I still do the auction. And if I speak too long, Bonnie's going to stand up and tell me to wrap it up. She's the UU Popo. So I work on the membership committee. I still do that. I do the gift cards in the back of the church to raise money. And I was a board member for a while, and I really love it here. And how did I do, Bonnie? Okay, I'm finished. Next. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Janice. I really enjoyed hearing you speak. Next, we welcome a recent UUG member, Deborah Scarborough, to share. The only child of Jack and Jean, Deborah was raised in Bucks County, the home of William Penn. From an early age, she knew she wanted to be a librarian and fulfilled that dream with a BA in English from Penn State and a MLS from Rutgers University, moving to Northern Virginia after graduation, where her husband Paul had started his career with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Deborah started her career in academic libraries, switching a few years later to a U.S. ACE engineering library. Her final career shift was into medicine. First as a librarian in the community hospital and finishing a medical history librarian for ACOG, specializing in women's reproductive health and rights. Outside of her career, she enjoyed traveling the world. She acted as a co-general contractor with Paul to build 2 homes, one in Northern Virginia, one in Gettysburg, incorporating solar superlation and other green features. They had researched Paul's untimely death from Lewy body dementia put an end to their dream for a long retirement in Gettysburg. But reconnections with an old boyfriend from her PSU Mount Alo days has opened a whole new chapter of her life. The adventures continue. Come on up, Deborah.
In the tradition of writing term papers in college, I wrote this last Thursday night. I am a procrastinator. Some people may say I am a reprobate. My journey to Unitarian Universalism has been a long and winding road. As a child growing up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania in the 50s and 60s, of course my mom wanted to instill Christian values in me, so it was off to the Presbyterian church. The Quakers were too radical, and Sunday school. There I learned all the Bible stories and the theology, which held me in good stead later in my college English Lit courses. My father, however, didn't attend church. Perhaps it was what we now call PTSD. He was a pilot of a B-17 bomber during World War II and got shot down over Germany and spent a year and a half in a POW camp. Or maybe it was the physics and anthropology courses he pursued at UPenn after World War II. He did instill the love of science, the idea to question everything, that I could do anything a boy could do, read, and a good dose of cynicism to boot. Fast forward to those teenage years where I so desperately tried to fit in, but I was always considered a queer duck and ended up in the nerd herd. Expected to attend catechism class and be confirmed, I think I disappointed my mom and quietly pleased my father by not agreeing to be confirmed with the rest of the class. I was beginning to question the whole dogma of Christianity. After all, unwed mother, older man willing to marry her, a 30-year-old unmarried Jewish boy, give me a break. Sounded a lot like the other older religion myths I'd read about in my father's library. Then life got busy. First, there was college. Penn State Mont Alto campus was far enough away that I couldn't go home except during term breaks, which was fine by me. Then there were classes, studying, working part-time in the library, and of course, partying. And it didn't hurt that the male-female ratio was 6-to-1. 2 years at Mont Alto led to 2 more years at main campus. A chance encounter in the senior section of the bleachers of Beaver Stadium led to marriage 2 years later, but that's another whole story. Then it was off to grad school. This time I commuted from home, which drove me crazy but kept me focused. Married between semesters, I'd ride the train every weekend between Trenton, New Jersey and Washington, D.C., where Paul had begun his career with the Corps of Engineers. Building a relationship on weekends didn't leave much time for church. Neither of us felt the real need, preferring to sleep in Sunday mornings, eat a late breakfast, read the Washington Post before I boarded the train back to Pennsylvania. An apartment led to a first house, then a second house, while we were both busy with our careers. Somewhere around 1985, we found a Prairie Home Companion on the radio. Still leery of churches and their myriad rituals and guilt-driven doctrines, I often said that Garrison Keillor on the radio gave a better sermon in his weekly monologues than most preachers from their pulpits. All this time, Unitarian Universalism had been lurking in the background. When my cousin was putting together a family tree in the mid-1980s, one of the things he asked for was religious denomination. I put down UU, which freaked out my mother and aunts. But the UU seemed to be the only rational group around in the land of Baptists and megachurches. Life moved on. We kept busy working, building houses, traveling the world. Someday you'll have to ask me about my famous temple and museum tours. We did 7 cathedrals in England on one trip. Life moved on. We kept busy working, but we didn't give religion and its place in my life much thought. Then Paul was diagnosed with, at first, Parkinson's disease. It wasn't until the end that we realized it was Lewy body dementia. At first, it was take your meds and keep walking. It wasn't until Paul retired the second time and we had built a house in Gettysburg that I realized he was getting worse and it was time for me to retire too. A few years later, and I realized we needed more socialization and intellectual stimulation than visits to doctor's offices and the grocery store. So I started looking for a church to attend. Although Gettysburg had several good prospects, I scratched them off the list because of parking. The most liberal church I could find with a social justice doctrine was the Zion United Church of Christ in Orangeville. Their pastor at the time was a woman, and she actually preached about social issues. Check and check. And I liked the music. I have to say I made several good friends who, when Paul started getting really crazy and my mom went into assisted living, they were life and sanity savers for me. I was amazed how many attended Paul's memorial service in 2019. A quiet year followed where I started to reflect on the purpose of life. What was the point of being here? But there was still that Lutheran dogma to contend with, and the cynic was getting more and more frustrated with having to put up a faith facade when all I wanted was the basic principle of the golden rule. Never fear, we're nearing the end of this journey. I had to start not just a new chapter in my life, but a whole new book. The first page started with the words, "Call me," scrawled at the bottom of an annual Christmas letter I sent to Bill the year Paul died. The story really took off the following fall when, in the middle of a global pandemic, I agreed to make a cross-country drive to California. Previously, Bill had told me about attending the UU Church of Fresno when he stayed out there every winter. They sounded like a nice group of fairly rational people, so I started attending their services online. They said what I needed to hear. I felt I finally found my spiritual home. I was looking forward to meeting them in person and seeing what their legs looked like. But I knew I needed a place to go back east, and that's when I started attending UU Gettysburg. And you know what? You're a nice group of fairly rational people too, without all the trappings. And so the adventure continues.
Thank you, Deborah. Really enjoyed hearing you speak. Finally, we welcome a friend of UUG, Dick Schroep. Dick grew up in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, after graduating from Bucknell University in the Dickinson School of Law. He briefly practiced law in Chambersburg, then went to work at a credit union as a credit manager. The Betsy Company is in Shippensburg for 19 years. He returned to law, joining his wife Pat's practice, until he retired in 2008. Dick then became an adjunct instructor teaching action at Wilson College, and he directed plays at the high school in Hagerstown, Maryland. He retired again in 2018. Dick's in-laws had attended a UU church in West Palm Beach, Florida. When Dick and Pat discovered there was one in Gettysburg, they decided to visit. This was during the pandemic, so they started by Zooming and then began to attend in person. They found a warm and friendly environment with lots of interesting and open-minded people. Pat has joined the UUG, and Dick is in his usual deliberative sound, better than indecisive way of giving a lot of thought to membership as he ponders his personal spiritual quest. Come on up, Dick.
Good morning. My personal spiritual odyssey is a tale of an interrupted journey. As an adolescent and a young adult, I thought I was on the path. I thought I knew the way. But for most of my adult life, I've found myself lost in the dark woods, the right road lost. Now, perhaps I've found a path again, but first the facts. I grew up in the United Church of Christ, a pretty standard mainline Protestant denomination. As a child, I went to Sunday school and church when I couldn't get out of it, went through confirmation and joined the church, but I had no strong feelings about religion or faith. When I was a teenager, my father met a man who had moved from Atlanta, Georgia to Shippensburg to go to a church, specifically a little church that was about a mile out the road from my house. He invited Dad to visit on a Wednesday evening service. Dad came home excited and amazed. The people of this church seemed to take their faith seriously, unlike the tepid Sunday morning faith we were used to. They sang and prayed with enthusiasm. They stayed after service to talk scripture. They were unselfconscious in their professions of faith. We started going to church, and it was exciting. Suddenly, the Bible seemed to make sense. Suddenly, life seemed infused with purpose and meaning. There was a sense of closeness and community, unlike anything I'd seen in regular church. And best of all, there was a sense of being special, of being chosen, of being among the saved, the elect. The church was Pentecostal, but independent. They actually spurned the various Pentecostal denominations. But people raised their hands in song and prayer. They spoke in tongues and prophesied. As the weeks went by, however, we listened to the pastor's sermons, and we realized that the church also had teachings which were virulently anti-Catholic, anti-Semitic, and downright racist. The pastor, who hailed from Northern Ireland, was a British Israelist, convinced that the white Anglo-Saxon people from the British Isles were the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Disappointed and confused, we drifted away. Almost immediately, however, we stumbled onto an evening worship group led by a Methodist minister in town. The minister had joined the charismatic movement, which was beginning to sweep through the Catholic and Protestant churches in the late 1960s. Here again, we found people excited about their faith, certain that God was active in their day-to-day lives, and with that seductive hook of a second baptism, an opportunity to tap directly into the awesome power of the Holy Spirit. Again, there was that sense of being special. I can't say that I ever manifested any of the spiritual gifts, but the idea of being a supercharged Christian was very enticing. But with the enthusiasm came controversy. The pastor's congregation was none too pleased with his off-Sunday activities, feeling that he was neglecting his duties to his larger church and that he was getting caught up in a cult. Eventually voted out by his congregation, he had to leave town and move away. I went on to college, where I found a very active chapter of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. Here again were people taking their Christian faith seriously, excited about their faith commitments, ready to witness to the secular campus. The fellowship, however, was not charismatic in its outlook, and I soon found that second baptism stuff didn't seem all that critical to my faith. By the time the charismatic movement caught up with our campus, I no longer felt it was essential. But, as it had in so many places, the movement brought controversy and schism. The fellowship was almost torn in half by the time I graduated, with the charismatic faction coming under the influence of a young student cult leader who was telling fellow students what they should and shouldn't do, even whom they should marry. At law school, I looked for a Christian group. Finding none, I went next door to Dickinson College, where I found a fellowship also torn apart by the charismatic evangelical split, a young cult leader holding sway over one faction. Discouraged and disgusted, I set a plague on both your houses and allowed the fire of my religious enthusiasm to drain away. Over the many years since, I became increasingly disenchanted with the direction of evangelical Christian faith in our country, disturbed by its growing alliance to right-wing causes and candidates. I began to describe myself as a hopeful agnostic, doubtful that faith could be meaningful, and sad that I could not satisfy the sense of spiritual longing that I felt. Over those years, I read a lot of books on topics related to spirituality, books on Christian faith, Buddhism and Eastern religions, world mythology, general non-specific spirituality, and so on. But for a long time, I have felt blocked intellectually and spiritually, unable to grapple in any meaningful way with life's existential questions. And I felt lonely on my quest. Then recently, Pat, Matt, and I began attending services here. And I've spent some time pondering the 8 principles and the 6 sources, listening to sermons and talks, reading UU authors. And I feel that things may be opening up for me, and that I'm excited once again to renew my spiritual quest. My steps are tentative, and I'm still fearful that at the end of the day, there may be nothing certain beyond the frog's assurance that we're all going to croak. But being involved with UUG has encouraged me that there is a path, perhaps many paths, and that there is value and excitement in exploring what Forest Church called the cathedral of the world. Thank you all for helping me on my journey. It's a pleasure to be in your company. Burned all those years ago, I am reluctant to be a joiner, and I am mindful of the Groucho Marx quote, "I would never belong to any organization that would have someone like me as a member." But Pat suggested that perhaps I should surprise everyone by announcing that I'm ready to sign the book. It makes sense. I'm ready. I'll sign the book.